Well, hello there again. This is Brian Goulet of GouletPens.com, and this is episode number 80 of Goulet Q&A, my weekly question and answer broadcast. So I have been pretty busy lately. It's number 80. That's kind of crazy to hit. It's May 29th of 2015 is when this is broadcasting. Been up to a few things. I got a new pen, the Faber-Castell Ambition. Just shot a quick look on that, launched it last week. Got a little quick look video up there for you. Trying out some new kind of techniques of shooting some of our videos. You know, Jenny and I have been working on some things to kind of help, you know, make things flow a little better. So the quick look videos are really nice, I think, because it conveys a lot of information in a very short period of time, as opposed to, say, a Q&A, where I ramble on for an hour or more, trying to hit it a little bit quicker so you can kind of get concise information that you might be interested in. So I like the quick look format, and it's something I've been playing with for the last year or so. So I'm going to try to do some more of those. It's nice because, you know, as nice as it would be to do like a full video review, it just takes a lot of time to be able to produce those, and my time is, you know, harder and harder to come by these days. So I'm trying to think of ways to still help to get really useful content out for you, but not make it so burdensome for me that, you know, it takes a month for me to prepare a video. But anyway, so I got that one out, so check that out. Travel Pens Work Edition, I did that last week. It's actually going to be like a kind of a three-parter. So we already shot and just waiting to publish the Beach Edition, like Beach Vacation Edition. And for those of you who were on Periscope, you got to see some of the behind the scenes. We green screened the intro to this, what I am very affectionately calling the ham and cheese factor in my videos. So the way the ham and cheese kind of thing came about is, you know, we started kind of just hamming it up a little bit in some of these intros. My style, generally, when I try and act in any sort of way, is I come across as really cheesy. So I'm calling it the ham and cheese because it's hamming it up and I always make it cheesy. So, you know, ham and cheese intros on these videos, it's worked really well. I got a lot of, you know, comments and a lot of, you know, engagement on the Shady Inks video that we did. Also on the, oh gosh, what was the other one? My memory's failing me right now. Next Level Pens, stepping up with a montage there. So it'll be along that vein. So I think you'll really enjoy it. It's our first time we've ever done a green screen here at Goulet, so it should be pretty interesting. And then we're gonna have another one that's gonna be a like Euro trip type of, you know, traveling abroad backpacking type of situation. So it's all products that are related to that type of travel situation. So it should be kind of interesting. I don't know, we're trying it out. And then I mentioned Periscope. Periscope, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a relatively new app that allows you to live stream through your phone, and the stream is linked up through Twitter. So anyone who's a Twitter follower at Goulet Pens, you can see whenever we're doing a live Periscope broadcast. Or if you have the Periscope app, you can get it through you know, the App Store if you're on Mac. I'm not sure about Android and all that kind of stuff. I'm hearing things about it not working as great. But there's a chat function that goes on through the phone, at least, so you can chat with me as I'm shooting. So basically we just flip it on kind of randomly. I've only done like 3 broadcasts so far, but as I have time, I'll flip it on, talk a little bit, and you know, get to answer your questions live. So it's kind of live Q&A. And you know, the reason it's so exciting for me to do that is because Rachel and I together used to do a regular live broadcast, very much in this kind of Q&A format, when we first started the company. So the first 2 years of our business, we did a regular live broadcast. We did about 100 episodes of that, and there was a live chat going on. It was really fun, really engaging. It got to be too much for production value for us to be able to maintain it, and we would shoot it at night, you know, after we'd already put in a work day, and it just didn't balance well with our family life as our kids got older, so we had to stop it. But now Periscope is a way we can kind of just jump on during the day, and it shows you the recording of it for 24 hours after it's posted. So if you haven't heard of Periscope yet, go ahead and check it out. You can watch it through your desktop if you want to just kind of stream it and not be too committed to it. So it's kind of interesting. So join up on Periscope. We got like 100 followers already, which is kind of cool, you know, given how relatively new it is and how few broadcasts we've done. So that's pretty cool. So, you know, as I have time, I'll kind of jump on throughout the day and just show some behind the scenes stuff. You know, like I mentioned, we did the green screen with the Travel Pens, so that was kind of cool. And the last thing I mentioned before I get all into the questions is we recently picked up Pilot Metropolitan rollerball pens, which I know a lot of you were excited about. Some of you think it's heresy for me to carry rollerballs, but you know, I've said the spiel several times before. We started out Goulet pens through pen making, you know, hand turning pens, and they were all rollerball pens. That was the original enhanced writing experience for me, coming from ballpoints to rollerballs. It was a gateway for me to get into fountain pens. So that's why I like carrying, you know, popular, inexpensive, well-writing rollerballs, is so that I can essentially provide a enhanced writing experience to people who aren't quite ready to get into fountain pens yet, and then hopefully look to, you know, transition over people to the light side, if you will. You know, even standalone, as a standalone pen, it's a great pen. I love it. I plan on doing a quick look on this. I'm going to try to shoot it tomorrow and have it out for you next week. We'll have to see if that schedule actually works out, but that's the intention. So it's the same size and everything as a regular Pilot Metropolitan. It's $13.50, and it uses the Pilot G2 rollerball refill, which are very easy to find. We're going to carry them. We don't have them at this moment, but we're getting them. You know, they are great writers, very, very popular writing instruments. So really excited about that. So to get into this week's questions, I'm going to start out with some pens and writing ones. I got a good number of questions. I got about 13 of them, so I'm going to try to roll along a little bit. I've been running pretty long on my videos lately, and my intro alone here, I'm already at like 6-7 minutes, whatever, so I'll try to go a little quicker. All right, so pens and writing. I got a question from Chris W. on Facebook. Who wins in a shootout, the Pilot Vanishing Point or the Lamy Dialog 3? I actually don't have a Dialog 3. I used to carry it for a couple of years here at Goulet. I don't have one anymore. I never had one in my personal collection. Kind of wishing maybe that I did. I mean, I could always get one, of course, but the Lamy Dialog 3, it uses a 14-karat Lamy nib, which I love. The pen writes well, but it's a $400 MSRP. It's just really expensive pen for what you get. And the Pilot Vanishing Point is such a solid pen. I mean, I've been using mine. I've been using Vanishing Point for years, and I just haven't really carried it around with me as much. So I have been doing that more lately. You got my matte black one here. I have an extra fine nib in it, which I don't like as much as a writing experience. I actually prefer more of a medium or a broad. In this pen, the medium is kind of my sweet spot, but I've been using it on this Leuchtturm, you know, dot grid, which is a 5mm ruling, which is a pretty tight ruling. So I've been just kind of journaling some like my thoughts, and you know, Rachel and I put together like some goal setting kind of stuff. So I've been using that, and that nib works really well. It's definitely finer. If you want the extra fine in the Vanishing Point, it goes finer than the Lamy nibs do. So if you like fine nibs, if you like the click retraction, it's better. You know, the Vanishing Point has the click, whereas the Dialog 3, you have to actually hold it with two hands and twist to retract it. The Dialog 3 doesn't seal as well, which I've heard they're redesigning. I don't know what stage that's happening. And it's the Vanishing Point is half the price. So for me, it's an easy decision, Vanishing Point. If you notice, I don't even carry a Dialog 3 in my store, and there's a reason for that. Part of it is it didn't sell very well, and part of it was just too expensive, and I just didn't really believe in it for what it was. You know, the only two pens that I don't carry from Lamy are the Scala and the Dialog 3, because I just think that they're too expensive for what they are. I never carried the Scala. I did carry the Dialog 3 for a while, and just, you know, it wasn't popular, so I just dropped it. So it's not that it's a bad pen, it's just that it's for what they had to do to engineer it, the costs were just too high. So for what you're getting, you're paying very much of a premium. And when you have a great pen like the Vanishing Point, you know, that's what it is. So I'm sorry, Lamy. I love you, Lamy. I love you a lot. You know that. You know that. If anybody from Lamy are watching, I love you. But that Dialog 3 is just, I'm speaking for the people on this one, like it's just too expensive. So that's about all I have there. Next question. Poti on Facebook. Hello, Brian. Currently, I have a Pilot Vanishing Point with a fine nib, and I want to switch to an extra fine. Give me some suggestions about whether I should buy an extra fine nib unit separately or buy a Vanishing Point with an extra fine nib, whole pen. The former option will make the fine nib unit useless, as I only have one pen body, and the latter option is more expensive. What do you think? Oh, this is a quandary, Po. This is a quandary. And I'm curious to know, you know, all of you who are having opinions out there right now, post your comments on, it's not the question of the week, but I'm very curious to know what you would do in this kind of situation. You know, whether it's a Vanishing Point or some other pen that has a separate nib unit where it's, you know, close to half the price of the pen, how do you make that decision to do it or not. So I'm going to give you a couple of, well, just to give some background here, okay? The Pilot Vanishing Point, the pen itself is $140, assuming you're going with a normal version and not a Raiden or something really expensive, but most of the pens are $140. That includes a nib unit and a converter and all that kind of stuff. Now when you buy a nib unit, you're getting the converter, but you're just getting the nib unit. You're not getting the body of the pen. Now, way back in the day, we used to sell nib units separate from bodies. We do not do that anymore because it became a logistical nightmare for us to do so, so we had to move to just selling pens bodies with nib units and then just nib units, no body onlys. I don't really know anyone that does that anymore. It's just really hard because Pilot doesn't like sell them that way. You have to buy whole pens and then separate out the nib units and then manage all that on the back end as a retailer. That just gets really hard to manage and it's really easy to screw up your inventory and stuff. So we had to get away from it. And then you end up with too many of one type of nib unit and so on because, you know, long story short, but we don't do that anymore. We haven't for, you know, over a year. So the nib unit itself, just the nib unit, is $61. And the pen is $140 with a nib unit. So basically there's a $79 price of what you're paying for the body. So do you pay an additional $79 to get a whole other pen, then you have two of them, or do you just shell out the $61 and then you're essentially, that's $61 with the other nib unit that you're not using? This is a tough choice. So me personally, I mean, you're talking to a guy who has almost more pens than he can keep track of, almost. But I would say that me personally, I would think it would be cool to have the option for both, because you get in the situation sometimes where you want to use it in something like a Leuchtturm where it's got really tight ruling, a dot, you know, 5mm, the extra fine really comes in handy. For me though, the extra fine is too fine when I'm trying to write on a 7 or 8mm ruling. Yes, of course you can do it, but as many pen options as I have, I prefer to go with something more like a fine or a medium in that type of situation, depending on the paper grade and so on. So that said, I don't think that you would probably regret getting a whole separate pen, but it is more money to have to shell out, and I get that. Another option that I'll throw out for you is you could always buy just the nib unit, see if you like it even, and then if you don't like it, then you have the option to return it and so on. You're not dealing with a whole pen. But if you like the extra fine, you could always resell the fine on something like Fountain Pen Network or eBay, excuse me, or something like that. You would still be able to get back a fair price, I think, and that would be able to subsidize a lot of the cost of the new nib unit. You know, I imagine you could probably sell it for 75% maybe of what you bought it for, maybe 50%. You know, that would be something that would help subsidize that. So that's another option there, throwing out for you. So think about that one. But yeah, you won't have an option probably to be able to buy just a body in the future. So if you buy just the nib unit and you have an extra nib unit, you're really going to be kind of stuck with that unless you sell it, in case you ever want to, like, well, and you could always switch back and forth, which is another option, but I don't know a lot of people that do that, especially between an extra fine and fine. It's one thing if it's like an extra fine and a broad or something like that, then it makes more sense to have two completely separate nib units that you can swap back and forth in the same pen. But with extra fine and fine are fairly close, or close enough to each other where I don't know if it'll be worth it to you to switch back and forth like that. So I would encourage you to either go with the nib unit and sell the other one that you aren't using as much, maybe after a month or two of making sure you really like it, or go with a whole other pen and then you have two pens. So that's my recommendation. Next question. Angel A on Facebook asks, hello Brian, are the nibs between the Faber-Castell Basic, Loom, and eMotion interchangeable? I want to buy them with a different nib each. Yes. So the Basic, the Loom, which we currently carry, also the Ambition, which is a relatively new addition, and the eMotion, they all use the same nib. Now that said, swapping the nibs in between them can be a little more difficult. If you're trying to pull the nib unit out itself, it definitely gets a little bit tricky. I have an eMotion actually, and I have been getting more questions about it. And in fact, I have the other one. Gosh, it's failing me right now. The hexagonal pen. That one also uses the same nib. So they all are using the same nib. It's about a number 5 size nib. The curvature on the nib seems to be a little bit different than some of the other number 5s. So if you're trying to swap a different brand into the Faber-Castell ones, that gets a little tough. Excuse me. especially if you're trying to like actually pull it out. So pulling out the nib unit can get a little tough. You can do it, but if you've never done it before, it can be a little harrowing, and it can be easy to bend the fins on the feed. So just be aware that that's a possibility. On some of the pens, you can actually unscrew the nib unit itself. If you're going to swap the nibs in between them, that's the route that I would recommend going. But you can do that with the basic Loom eMotion. Yeah, you can swap the nib units in between them just like this. I was trying to see if I had like a Loom. Oh, I have a Loom. Let's do it. Let's do it right now. Why not? On the fly. Here we go. Let's see here. Where is my Loom? Where's my Loom? Here it is. Nope, that's a basic. Here's a Loom. Oh, I have a basic too. Okay. I thought I had these all inked up, so I've got an Ambition and a Basic all inked up. So yeah, if I want to do it, it helps if you're swapping nibs like this to pull the converter off if there is one on there. There's not on this pen, but you can do it. So I can unscrew it. See, this one is not unscrewing quite as easily. They should all unscrew. Oh, that is really giving me a challenge. So yeah, so that's in trouble. Okay, so this one, as I'm trying to unscrew the nib unit, which when you're unscrewing it, you never want to like grab the tip and do anything with that. It's easy to mangle it. So you really want to grab down at the base and keep your fingers off the tip. So I was trying to use the nib and the feed to unscrew the whole nib unit, but it ended up just kind of twisting it within the nib unit there. So this is the kind of situation you get into. I'm actually glad this happened, so that I can show you what you might run into. So I've got the nib here and the feed and all that. Same nib and feed and the housing and everything, but my housing on this pen is just really stuck in there for some reason. I guess when they screwed it in, it was really tight. So I was able to remove the housing out of the eMotion, but not on my Loom. So now it's like, okay, now I have a whole housing. So basically if I want to swap these two, I have to pull the nib out of the housing on the eMotion to be able to get it in there. Yes, it can be done, but if you've never done it before, it can be a little bit harrowing if you screw it up. You know, this is a hack. This is something that you're doing that wasn't really intended originally to be done, so you're kind of taking the risk on yourself if you do screw anything up. So I'm not going to completely discourage you from doing it, but just make sure that you're aware kind of that risk, I guess. Excuse me. That you're aware of that risk as you're doing it, and you'll be in pretty good shape. So hopefully that helps you out there. Yeah, you can do it, but just practice, know what you're doing. This next question. Okay, so I think Lynn is your name. If it is not, I'm sorry, but if it is, props. I'm trying to read your characters here. So Lynn, I think, is your name, and if that's wrong, please correct me. This is yet an interesting question, so I wanted to answer it. All right, perfect copper plate or perfect flex pen that never railroads, has perfect flow, easy to clean, high ink capacity, never dries out, and so on. Given no effort for the first and no cost for the second. I don't really know what that last part means, but essentially, okay, I have a plan for you. So what you do is you buy a pen, any flex pen you want, just any one. Close your eyes, and once you fall asleep, then you can dream and your pen will do whatever you want. So that's kind of a jerky answer there, but essentially there is no perfect pen, especially when you're looking at flex, okay? It's a tool, and it's a rather finicky tool. You know, it's sort of like if you, I'm trying to think of a good analogy on the fly, but it's like any tool, any instrument, or, you know, I don't know why, like archery, like a bow and arrow is coming to mind randomly, but like any fine piece of equipment that you're trying to use, usually it's going to be finicky and harder for, you know, beginners to be able to use. It's usually people that are more practiced, more studied, that are able to use it effectively. So, or it's like golf clubs or something. Like anyone can swing a golf club, but if you want to be able to use a golf club to do a, you know, 350-yard drive, or I don't really know anything about golf. I think that's long. That sounds really long to me, probably too long. But if you want to do a really long drive, you gotta practice, be good, and have good clubs. So it's like that kind of situation. So if you want to get beautiful flex, yes, you have to have a flex pen, but you also have to know how to use it. You're not going to be able to just pick it up and have perfect copper plate and perfect all this stuff. You're gonna have to practice a lot and really get to know your instrument and how it works and practice with it. Just as a point of reference here, I have this drawing back here. I have been asked about it. I think I may have even had a question this week about what this drawing is, so maybe it's kind of a bonus. But this was done with a Noodler's Ahab by Said Nocon. He's a comic book artist in California. He and I had connected, and he did that for me. Perfect. That's original artwork there. He said his Ahab, he picked it up out of the box, did not skip or railroad a single time for the entire drawing that he did there. You know, he's Noodler's Purple Heart, which is a lubricated ink. But, you know, now, is that something you can expect? Okay, Noodler's Ahab has a reputation. Noodler's pens in general have a reputation for being fussy. Okay, but it's not necessarily like a quality control type of issue. Yes, okay, a pen that inexpensive, you might have some quality control issues. That is certainly something legitimate, and we handle those things. Please, info@gouletpens.com. We will help you with that all day long. But that just goes to show right there what even a relatively inexpensive tool can do in the hands of somebody who has used them for years and years and really knows what they're doing. So that certainly helps to compensate for perhaps some of the finickiness that a pen like that could have for somebody that doesn't really necessarily know how to use it as well. That said, if I was to try to draw that with a Noodler's pen, it would look terrible. Not only the drawing itself, but I would have problems because I'm not as, as practiced as somebody with the skills of said. So that said, you're not going to find anything that's perfect, but with practice, practice makes perfect, or whatever you want to call it. So that is kind of where I will leave it off. All right, got some ink questions. This one is from Brandon D on Facebook. What one ink would you recommend for each color category on gouletpens.com? I want to have a variety of colors to choose from, but I want to limit myself so I do not have more ink than I can possibly use. Well, first off, get samples. Okay, that's like number one, get samples of all these things. And I'm just gonna really go like top of mind. What I did is I pulled up on gouletpens.com, I went to the swab shop, and I did the comparison of ink by color choice, okay? And I just went through each of those and just picked the one that I like or I thought would be interesting or kind of unique or popular within that brand, okay? So it's really not a scientific approach here at all. I didn't look at sales data or any of that kind of stuff. It's just purely like, this is what I thought. So I'm just gonna blow through them. So get this list or check on the blog. If you go to the blog, I'm gonna have a list with links to all of these. So if you miss any here, just go check it there. Starting out, black, I would say Noodler's Heart of Darkness. Noodler's Black is also good, but Heart of Darkness is really unique. I think you should try it. Blue, Noodler's Liberty's Elysium. I helped design it. It's the color of my walls. I just love it. So that was what I would recommend there. Brown, I would say Pilot Iroshizuku Tsukushi, Horsetail. So it's a really good brown ink, very popular. Iroshizuku is awesome. For burgundy, I would go Black Swan Australian Roses. It shades like crazy. I just had it in the top 5 shading inks, sorry, top 7 shading inks there. So that was cool. Green, I would say Private Reserve Spearmint. I like it. It's just a bright, classic kind of Christmassy green. Okay, so that's cool. Gray, Noodler's Lexington Gray. Not only is it a great gray with good shading, but it also is bulletproof. So that's really kind of cool. Orange, come on. Noodler's Apache Sunset. Like, how would I go with anything else, right? But there's a lot of really good oranges actually, so you could go with a lot of different ones. Pink, I said Pilot Iroshizuku Yamabudo. That one's really good. It's really like a magenta kind of pink, but there's different ways you could go with pink. That's what I liked. Purple, Diatramentis Aubergine. That's a really beautiful purple, kind of a darker purple, but really nice. Not as bright violet-y as some of the other ones, but it's really nice, flows great. Red, my personal favorite, is Diamond Red Dragon. But there's a lot of good reds right in that range there. Turquoise, I would say Diamond Marine. That's just my favorite turquoise, but there's lots of really good ones. And then yellow, I said Jeroboam Amber de Bermani. It's really kind of more of a gold yellow, but the bright yellows are almost unusable. You got to go with something a little bit darker, a little more of a gold color to get something really kind of usable. So that covers one ink from every category on the Goulet Pens site. So if you have other recommendations, be sure to leave them in the comments. Those are just really kind of ones that as I went through, yeah, I said top of mind, but I made a list of them last night, so I wasn't literally just thinking. But I just looked through the swab shop and looked through the swab shop and just picked the ones that really were like, oh yeah, that's a good one. All right, next question. Paper. One paper question this week. So your Chrome Y on Facebook asked, as an art student, I often write on sketch paper and watercolor paper. Both of them are thick and have textures, especially the watercolor paper. They're quite soft as well. I don't think there will be bits of paper stuck on the nib as long as I don't use extra fine nibs. Do I have to worry about material taken from the nib too much, or is it kind of okay? Watercolor paper is interesting because I don't know as much about it personally. We've carried some watercolor paper here in the past, but usually I carry it it kind of does okay, and then it really doesn't do well, and then I drop it, and then I carry it again, and I'm kind of just in this cycle of every year or so trying to carry watercolor paper, and then it doesn't sell that great, and then I don't have it, and we get asked about it a lot, and then we carry it again, and then it doesn't do that great, and so we just kind of get in that cycle. We don't have, you know, a lot of art supply type of products here, you know, so it's just that tends to not be something that's as popular for us for whatever reason. So I've used some watercolor papers in the past, but there's, you know, more kind of a little bit different elements to watercolor paper than there are in, say, like journals and, you know, correspondence paper. Definitely more like a texture kind of thing, like what you're talking about. The thing with most watercolor paper, though, is it usually has a pretty heavy coating or some kind of sizing or something like that on it to be able to resist the ink or water or whatever, acrylic or whatever it is that you're putting on there. So because it's made more for like mixed media and sketching and watercolor stuff, you're often going to have more of a texture, because when you're dealing with things like pencils and graphite and you know, different types of you know, things like that, chalk, it's better to have more texture. It's not like Rhodia or Clairefontaine where it's like really smooth, and that would be harder to do something like, you know, mixed media. But the paper is usually thicker, so you don't get buckling when you do this mixed media stuff on there. So that said, writing on them with fountain pens, that's not necessarily the people that are making watercolor paper, that's not necessarily their mentality is, oh, people will write on these with fountain pens. It's more, oh, they're going to be sketching with pencil or some kind of chalk or something, and doing painting, acrylic, whatever. And that's what it's going to be mainly used for. So that's, I think, more what they cater to. That said, using fountain pens on them, I don't think is really a problem. Because you have that sizing, the coating on there, even with the texture, I don't think you end up in a situation where the tines are like scratching and digging up paper and getting it in there. That said, it certainly could happen. So if it does happen, and you do end up having flow issues and stuff getting paper stuck in the tines of your nib, that's where a brass sheet really helps a lot. And we sell brass sheets here at Goulet. You can also, I've had people use it, I don't recommend it quite as much, but you can use filler gauges that you use for like automobile spark plug gauges. So you can use those as well. You got to use really thin ones. I forget the exact one to use. I think it's like 0.01 millimeter, I think is the right one to use, or 0.05 maybe is the thick, I don't know. Pretty thin one. So we sell the brass sheet. That works really well because brass is soft, and it'll bend. I was gonna say it's more malleable. What's the adjective of that one? Malleate. No, that's a completely wrong one. Don't pick apart my grammar. But it's more malleable than the nib that you're using it on. So, you know, you can floss your tines, get the paper and junk out of there, and continue on writing if you end up in that kind of situation. All right, a couple personal questions this week, some of which are related to pens. So let's see here. When someone not personally close to you asks to borrow a pen, out of the pens that you carry, which do you hand over? Well, usually I'll hand over a Rollerball unless they specifically ask for a fountain pen, just quite honestly, because most people just don't know what they're getting into. It's honestly not that often that I run into that situation where somebody's just asking me, hey, do you have a pen? It just doesn't happen, you know. Part of that is just like my daily life. I work like a zillion hours. Anybody that I'm working with, they know I deal in fountain pens, so I'm usually just operating with fountain pens, and there are just a zillion pens around, so I'll just hand over something there. But you know, out and about, like in the world, so, but those are all people I know, so it's like people I'm not close to. I'm thinking like if I'm at a restaurant or something like that, I'll usually have a rollerball for those people, because you know, otherwise I get into fountain pens and I'm sitting there with my kids and we're trying to, you know, pay for our, you know, dinner at the restaurant, and I get into a whole conversation about, oh, fountain pens, how'd you get into that? Oh, you have your own business? What do you do? Da, 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 da. And it's like, okay, that's cool. I like talking about that, but not when my kids are like screaming and needing to get in the car and go home and want to, you know, whatever, play with Legos before they go to bed. You know, that kind of situation. So I will kind of gauge it. If I'm trying not to spark a conversation, I'll hand them a rollerball. If I want to spark a conversation, I hand them a fountain pen. That said, the fountain pen that I will usually go to is the Pilot Metropolitan, partly because it's just a great pen, and partly because if they happen to completely just mangle the thing, it's not a huge loss, you know. So it's a really nice pen. And another thing that I actually like about it, this is the rollerball version, but the fountain pen is the same. When you're using it, if you noticed, anybody who's into fountain pens, most fountain pens are screw cap. You know, you got to unscrew them and then the cap comes off and you can post it and go on about your life. Most other people who aren't used to fountain pens have, you know, pull cap, snap cap. So that's usually the default that people go to. So if you have a really nice screw cap fountain pen and you hand it over to somebody that doesn't have any knowledge of it, first thing they're going to do is yank and try to yank the thing. And I've had people destroy the threads on my pens and mangle pens and break them and stuff because they try to pull off a screw cap thread. So if I'm ever a screw cap thread, I'll hand it over and be like, it's a screw cap, or I'll start unscrewing it and say, hey, it just unscrews like that. You know, just very simple, natural, don't embarrass them or whatever, but I'll just be like, hey, yeah, it's a screw cap, or I'll unscrew the thing and then post it and hand it to them and say, here you go. Ooh, and then, because then it like kind of presents the nib and it's like, oh my gosh, this is a bad example. I'm using a rollerball anyway, but you know, let's see here. Here's a Faber-Castell. Now this is a bad example because it's metal, but you know, that kind of situation. If you hand that and they start yanking on it, they could strip the threads and do all that kind of stuff. So you would just unscrew that and then present it and be like, it's a fountain pen, isn't that cool? You know, so that's a very natural way that you can kind of avoid that. But usually Pilot Metropolitan is a pretty good way to go. You can hand it to them, it'll write nicely, it's not too complicated, it's not too intimidating. If you hand over a really nice, really heavy pen or whatever, sometimes people are like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't want to use it, whatever, and they're a little more intimidated. You know, you gotta play the situation depending on what it is, but nice solid writing pen usually is a good one to go. Okay? Eric O on Facebook asked, who plays Brian in the film Right On, the Brian Goulet story, and who plays Rachel? This is funny. So yeah, I don't know. We talk about like doppelgangers and stuff like that around the office here. You know, I don't really have like a one specific person that's like so obviously my doppelganger. Personally, like I think I'm a fairly generic looking guy, so I don't really know who, like, I don't look distinctively like any particular celebrity. So I'm running over my mic cord with the chair. Rachel thinks that I look like Dominic Purcell, who's an actor. You can look him up. He was on the show Prison Break. Prison Break came out when Rachel and I were in college, so we watched that together. And at the time I had my head shaved a lot like he has in that show. He played Lincoln in that show, and so she thinks I look a lot like him. He's got way more of a cut jaw than I do, though. He's got like one of those like jaws that you could like cut cheese with or something. I don't know, cut cheese. Whatever, you get what I'm saying. But she thinks I look like him. I don't really have any other like suggestions or whatever. I don't know who else, so I don't know. Rachel, I think, has a few more kind of like doppelgangers. So when like you're talking about like who would play somebody in the film, so for Rachel I was thinking like, you know, Tina Fey. She's got the glasses, really smart, you know, pretty witty. Jennifer Garner too, I think, has, you know, looks kind of like Rachel. Those were some ones that like she thought that she might be. I think she could also be played by Rachel Lee Cook. You know, in 1999, She's All That came out. Rachel and I were freshmen in high school. Very formative time for us. That's like the perfect movie for high school freshmen to come out. It was very epic when it came out. And then, funny little side note, the parody of that movie called Not Another Teen Movie is one of me and Rachel's favorite movies of all time. Just because of all, it's like, it just encapsulates like parodies of all of the movies that came out like when we were in high school. But anyway, so I think Rachel Lee Cook could play her. And then also Julia Roberts in Erin Brockovich. A little less so looks-wise, but a little more so from like smarts and like being right. You know what I mean? Like Rachel is incredibly intelligent, has a phenomenal memory. So I think that the whole Erin Brockovich thing from Julia Roberts would really work for her. So sorry, I have like way more to talk about with Rachel than I do for myself on that one, but that's what you get. All right. Ty W on Facebook said, I heard you, this is kind of like a personal / business question, so I'm kind of transitioning over to the business stuff. I heard you mention a couple of times about values alignment with other companies or vendors that you use. When did the importance of that hit you? This made a recent choice much easier. So, yeah, so, you know, it's not often that I'll run across a company that has a complete values disalignment. You know, it's happened before in the past where I just, you know, not necessarily like a manufacturer making a product, but even like an avenue of excuse me, of collaboration or the way someone advertises things or whatever that just is indicative of some values that are kind of in conflict with what we do. Now, we are really pretty like self-contained here at Goulet, so there's not a lot of those kind of situations we run into. But more of what we've run into in the past has been distributors or manufacturers that have values that kind of differ from our own. And when I say that, I don't mean to make it sound like we're right, they're wrong. That's not what a values misalignment is all about. It simply means somebody might be all about, you know, high volume, lower service, as opposed to low volume, high service. One's not necessarily good or bad or the other. You know, think about like, you know, Nordstrom versus Amazon. You know what I mean? Nordstrom has a much more high-touch sales process than Amazon. Amazon is much more about low margin, high volume. So it's really not good, bad, or the other, but if the two of them tried to collaborate, it would probably not work that great because they have very different ways of approaching things. So that's really kind of it. So there have been some situations I've run into like that where it's some people have a different view of how they want to run and grow their business. You know, a good example would be like, you know, for example, Mont Blanc or Visconti, much more of a couture, like high, you know, boutique exclusivity kind of approach, as opposed to Noodlers, right? So, you know, much lower price, the pens and ink for the people kind of thing, very different approaches to very similar, you know, use products. In the grand scheme of things, very similar products. It's not like it's water balloons and trampolines, right? You know, it's like you're dealing with pens and ink and things like that. So in the grand scheme of things, they're pretty similar products, but just very different approach to those different things. So that's what I mean when I say like a values alignment kind of thing, is more about, you know, I recognize that you're going to have much more success with companies in whatever capacity you're dealing with where you have a values alignment. And that goes internally as well, like even the people that are on our team. You know, if there is a values alignment with people on our team, we're going to gel a lot easier than if somebody is, you know, very just kind of on a different plane than what we have going on here. That's why we defined our company values. That's why we have mission statements, and we have make it clear, and we communicate constantly about what our company's values are, because we all want to be unified and moving in the same direction. There's a lot of power in unity, okay? From just kind of a business standpoint, or, you know, family standpoint, or a church, or any volunteer organization, whatever it might be, if you are unified towards a common purpose, you're going to go way farther. So that definitely trickles down all the way from the manufacturer, all the way throughout distributors, retailers, etc. So it's not something that I overlook at all. As far as when that came importance, originally it wasn't on my radar at all. You know, consciously, subconsciously, sure. You know, I wanted to make sure that, you know, I had tried in the pen making days. I was in a much more, much lower, you know, power position, if you will. I was different. I was more of a manufacturer trying to sell out through retailers. So I felt that I had less of an ability to pick that kind of thing, that I didn't have my own values defined at that time. And as I tried to explore different retailers to sell my fountain pens through, I had no success in doing so, partly because my cost structure was all screwed up, but also partly because that kind of stuff wasn't on my radar at all. And I had no idea about pricing and how to market and all that kind of stuff. So it's something I learned later on. I've learned a lot of things kind of on the fly, if you haven't noticed that. Learned from the School of Hard Knocks. One line that Dave Ramsey uses a lot that I have pretty much adopted is, he talks about, and he says, our school colors are black and blue because of all the hard knocks we've taken. And I can definitely relate to that. Taking hard knocks, even as I speak here, I'm working through some hard knocks. So, you know, it's just, that's just part of business. Excuse me. So that said, it was really probably about, it was fairly early on, I would say like within the first year or so, as we were expanding. You know, we started out in the first several months only working with Exoclair, who distributes like Jerbon, Clairefontaine, Rodeo. We only dealt with ink and paper. As we kind of more drastically expanded our product line after kind of that first year, we got into Diamine and Private Reserve and Noodlers and Lamy and Pilot and a lot of these other companies. We started to notice that every manufacturer, every distributor, vendor, whatever, does things very differently. And that is actually one of the more complicated aspects of doing e-commerce as we do it is everybody's got a different system, they got different people, they have a different approach, they're in a different part of the country or the world, different types of communication. You have to be extremely adaptive and reactive and proactive. I would call it agile in managing all these different things. We have about 40 or 50 different vendors now that we buy all our various things from and communicate all that, and like that's why we have a whole team of inventory people that help manage that stuff, is because it's super complicated, just way more than you would possibly believe, to be able to do that well. So that said, when you have an alignment of values, things just work out so much easier. So much easier. So we recognized probably in the first year that that was something that was really important. Now, we never like completely overlook like fundamental kind of core values. Like if somebody believes that, you know, brick and mortar is the way to go and that online retailers are all scam artists, that's like a deal breaker because we're only online only. We don't have a brick and mortar store. So if somebody's mentality is that they have a distrust or a misunderstanding about online retail, that is not going to work for us, right? So that kind of stuff is deal breaker territory. There are other things where it's more of a thing you have to kind of work around. It's more of a preference thing, like, you know, the product is really good, but they are just not up to speed on social media and the internet, and they kind of just don't really trust. So that's why you end up with sometimes communication issues. You know, like a new product is released and it gets leaked out in some blog in, you know, Europe or India or something like that, and it hasn't come down officially through like the distribution chain, if you will, that this product is being released, because they, you know, want to try to keep it close to the chest and not release out information and stuff like that, but it ends up leaking out anyway. And so we're trying to communicate with certain vendors like, hey, this information's out there, can we talk about it? And they're like, no, not yet, it's not official. And it's like, well, it's out there, everybody's talking about it, so we'll not talk about it. But, you know, that's, so there's things like that where it's not so much of a values misalignment, it's just more of a different view on certain smaller aspects of things. So it's always kind of a, you know, give and take, and a little bit of a kind of, you have to go with your gut and see what's going to work out well in that kind of situation. But I think I've talked enough about that for now. So getting into some more business questions here. Brandon M. on Facebook said, I've been hearing rumors that Pilot will be bringing new colors of the Metropolitan to the US, essentially what they're selling as the Cocoon series in Japan right now. Is that true, or is it just a rumor at this point? Okay, we've been trying to clear this up because this rumor has been out. We've seen it on Reddit and other places like that. So yes, the Pilot Metropolitan is known as the MR in Europe, and it's known as the Cocoon in Japan. Same pen, except the MR has a standard international refill instead of a Pilot Namiki one, which is interesting, but you know, that's the standard over in Europe, so that's what they went with. So that said, but the pen body and everything is the same. That said, the Cocoon colors that are relatively new in Japan right now are just for the Cocoon. That's not the new colors that are coming to the Metropolitan in the US. There are new colors that are coming to the Metropolitan around November, December is the target date that I'm told right now. We're going to be getting 5 new colors, but it is not the same ones that you're seeing right now on the Cocoon. So if you love that Cocoon and have to have that color, you're going to have to buy it from Japan, because those are not what's going to be coming into the US. I can't officially say what the US colors are going to be yet, but I'm excited about them. I think they're pretty cool. So that's where I stand with that. Bijan A on, well, this is a business question, so I don't know where this came from. But Monday Matchup is a really creative way to not only put the spotlight on different pens and inks, but also to get your Insta followers promoting your company page by the endless amounts of regrams people end up posting to try to win them. Yes, that's kind of intentional. You're on to us, you know. No, yeah, of course we want people to share the stuff, but it's also really fun and entertaining and all that stuff. So no one's losing in this situation. I'd love to know how the idea was spawned, how tough it was to implement, and then also who gets to have the final say on which ink and pens you choose to highlight. Okay, so we're just, it's a very fitting question. Part of why I took it is because we're about to hit our 1-year anniversary for Monday Matchup. I think it's like June 15th is when we're going to be doing, that'll be the year anniversary, I believe. So that should be kind of cool. We're going to do something a little special for that, so that'll be kind of fun. The idea was originally spawned from within our team. So it was, you know, our media team that we had about a year ago came up and said, hey, I got this idea, what if we did this? And it was a lot of like just an initial kind of idea, and then it was really kind of thrown around a lot. So I can't really attribute like, you know, one person as having like the defining idea, because it ended up morphing and changing quite a bit as the conversation happened. But it took us kind of a little while to figure out a rhythm, definitely like 3 months probably to really find a rhythm, especially for like who should do the artwork, how should it be done. You know, at the time we had somebody in our warehouse team that was, our fulfillment team that was, you know, doing the artwork, and it was, you know, just exclusively him. And, you know, it was not, it was more kind of like artistically pushing the envelope, and it ended up straying a little bit away as we were, because we didn't like come up with a firm idea. As we were kind of exploring what this thing was going to become, we ended up going this very artistic route, and it ended up taking longer and longer to produce these things each week. And then we got away from originally kind of the pen and ink matchup thing. So we had to kind of like, you know, re-strategize what it was going to become, because it was getting to be kind of more or less attainable, and there was no contest of any kind in the beginning. And originally, when we started the idea, we matched up a pen and ink. We would do artwork with the ink and then just match a pen to it. It wasn't the ink used in that pen. That was something that we evolved to. It seems silly now to think about that, but that's, you know, that's originally, it was like, okay, are we really going to ink up a whole pen and ink every week? You know, so it was like, in the beginning, we didn't want to like commit to the process that much, because we didn't know that Monday Matchup was going to become a regular thing. It was something we just wanted to try. So it was like, let's do some artwork with an ink in a pen that we already have inked up personally, and then we'll just match a pen to it where it's kind of a cool matchup. But eventually what we ended up settling on is like, does this really make sense, all that and stuff. So around 3 month mark we hit, you know, and we said, hey, it really kind of makes more sense to match up the ink in the pen, the ink in the actual pen that we're doing. And then it's not so much about like just color wise matching the pen and ink, but then it's like you're actually seeing the nib and what it can do with the ink and stuff, because that's part of the appeal. So that was something we ended up kind of settling on. And then the situation we're in is like, we have our bottom shelf, right? So we were actually using the ink in the pen, so we couldn't just like sell it as new. It didn't feel right to do that, even though we just barely used it. So we would sell it as a bottom shelf item, as a slightly used but, you know, perfectly good thing. But eventually we decided, rather than doing that and you know, continually bottom shelving things every week, it would be more fun to give it away as a contest. So that was an evolution as well. We didn't start the contest until like 15 or 16 weeks in to the Monday Matchup. So that's where that kind of came about. And then Instagram was starting to pick up speed for us. So we, you know, focused on Instagram as the method of doing it, because managing the contest on Instagram is manageable for us. Doing contests outside of Instagram involves a lot more complicated logistics and stuff that would be harder for us to handle. So we focused on Instagram. So we're still doing it now, still have a contest every week for Monday Matchup, gets shared a lot. So it's really kind of cool. So, and then the question that you're asking is, oh, how tough was it to implement? Yeah, so I would say it was actually pretty tough. Especially to, you know, get people to do the artwork, because to come up with that artwork every week, and you see it, it's pretty good artwork. You know, if you've noticed, I've never done a Monday Matchup, and don't ask me to, because I'm, you know, well, I see what they're doing, my team is doing, and I am not capable of such things. So, you know, the fact that I said that now, you're probably gonna ask me to do it, but I would end up doing like a snowman or a, you know, a smiley face or something. But it's their artwork is just amazing, and they enjoy doing it. It's on a purely volunteer basis. Whoever's interested in doing it, so we have kind of a schedule that we manage, and it's actually kind of a bit of a logistical operation now. Not only because we have to like make sure that we have the ink and the pen in stock, so we have to plan it out months in advance, rotate people through it, you know, get everybody commit to it. We have timelines and schedules and all that kind of stuff. We have to pull the inventory aside. The inventory thing is a bit harder to juggle than anything else, you know, because we want to make sure that it's not like, you know, especially planning it out a couple of months in advance. Well, we want to ensure that if it's a pen that gets discontinued, or it's an ink that, you know, is going to be released at some point, like Lamy Copper Orange for example, we got it. It was supposed to be a regularly available ink for a year or so, sold out right away, and they just don't have any more. So it was like, you know, we had planned out for Monday Matchup with that. It launched, the ink was gone. It was like, ah, shoot, now we've just, you know, made everybody really want this ink, and we don't have any. That kind of stinks. So we have to kind of, it's really inventory that you know, is a factor as much as just about anything else. So the process that we end up using is, you know, whoever is doing the Monday matchup, we let them choose, or at least make recommendations about what ink and pen they want to use, because a lot of it is like, we got to have them inspired and want to do it, right? And then me and Rachel and our inventory team are working through to see, like, okay, logistically, what can we do? Is this something we can get? Is this a pen that we only get like once a year, like some of the Noodlers, you know, Conrad, the acrylics, and like that kind of ebonites and that kind of thing? So we have to like make decisions based on inventory. So, you know, that's not something that our media team or whoever might be contributing to the Monday matchup would necessarily have in their head as far as a given pen and what its availability is. So that's kind of like the final stamp to make sure, and then we kind of approve it, and then we just kind of, you know, knock them out. So it's kind of an involved process, something you don't really think about being that logistically complicated necessarily, but to put out content like that every week requires a lot of focused intensity. So making it happen. My team is awesome, and they put out awesome stuff, and I'm thrilled to be able to do it. We have a lot of fun, and we're going to keep doing Monday Matchup for as long as we possibly can. All right, to finish out, I got a couple of troubleshooting questions here. I'm moving along pretty good on this one. I'm looking at like 15 minutes. Okay, cool. Anna B asked on Facebook for Q&A, do you also find that the cellulose derivative Noodler's pens dry out really fast, even when capped and stored? I've filled my Ahab, neglected it in the desk drawer for a few days, and come back to a nearly bone dry pen, as in a dry piston chamber, not just as dry as in the nib and the feed. Same thing happens with my Creeper, but not my acrylic Conrad. Interesting. So yes, I would say this is not super unusual for these pens. They do tend to dry out a little bit quicker, especially I think the nib Creeper and the Ahab, for whatever reason. I don't know if just like the threads aren't as tight maybe or something. And I have noticed a little bit that the acrylic pens don't do it quite as much. Now what would be interesting would be to see if that happens on a regular Conrad versus an acrylic Conrad, because the design is similar, but it would be the main material that would be the main difference. With the Ahab and the nib Creeper, you're dealing with a whole different model of pen, so it's hard to say if an acrylic Conrad versus a cellulose derivative, you know, normal Ahab, if it's the material or if it's the pen model, because it's two different designs there. So that would be something interesting. I wish I could tell you off the top of my head about the Conrad thing, but it has been my observation that kind of lines up with what you're saying. Maybe not that fast, like in a couple of days. You may have some environmental factors there, like if you have, excuse me, if you have a really dry environment, like either dry as in like really hot and dry, like if you're in a very arid climate, or if you're in an environment where it's really hot and there's a lot of AC running, air conditioning sucks moisture out of the air and dries it out. So that could be another factor as well. That might be part of it, but you know, as far as like working around it, part of it just kind of is the pen and the way that it is. You know, just keeping the pen filled more regularly would be part of my answer. I understand that's a little bit annoying, but it's, you know, it's part of the deal with those pens. And then, you know, keeping it sealed up in like a Ziploc bag or something could also help. A little Ziploc snack bag, you know, like this kind of deal here. You know, just keep the pen sealed up in there if you know you're not going to be using it as regularly. Could be something that could help. But in general, especially with these flex pens, like I don't want to make it seem like, oh, Noodler's quality control, whatever, but it's like, part of it is these flex pens, like the Noodler's cuts these feeds so that they're like a big, wide feed channel so that it keeps a steady supply of ink for these flex pens as you're writing with them and flexing them out really far. However, when the pen's just sitting there, because of that wide open feed channel, it's going to be more likely to want to dry out. So it's kind of a give and take there on that. And then to wrap up for the week here, I got a question from Brandon P. on Facebook. Says, I'm just beginning to get into fountain pens, and I've converted my Platinum Preppy into the eyedropper pen. When I put some ink in, Diatramentis Indigo Blue, it started writing very light and unsaturated, as if the ink had been diluted or washed out. Is this normal for the pen, ink, or paper, medium quality copy paper that I'm using? Thanks. Okay, so indigo blue is a pretty dark blue, so I can understand why you would feel that it's not doing that. The paper might be a factor. Medium quality copy paper, if it's absorbent paper, having it absorb in there would certainly lighten up the color, so that might be part of it. Maybe just take it and try it on different paper, but I would say probably the situation you're getting into is one of two things based on context I don't have from your question. If it's a brand new pen, if you've never used it before, then it could just be that the ink is having to work its way through the feed. It should do that relatively quickly if you've just written a few lines or something and it's not standing out enough. Just keep writing with it more, and as the ink kind of works its way through, you'll be in that situation. But if you already had this pen and you've been using it, you cleaned it out, and you just converted it to an eyedropper, the situation that you're probably in, this is what I greatly suspect is your exact scenario. You clean the pen, you have some water left in the feed from after you cleaned it. Excuse me, I'm coughing a lot in this video. As you have, cleaned the pen, you have water left in that feed. Now normally when you're drawing ink up through the pen, like you would with a converter, any water that you would have in there would get diluted with the ink that you'd be drawing up into the pen. It wouldn't seem as drastic. But when you're doing an eyedropper, you're bypassing the nib and the feed of that pen. You're dumping the ink directly into the ink chamber, in this case the body. As you screw it back together and you go to write with it, you now have a bunch of water loaded up in your feed, and you got the ink back here, and the ink is working its way through, but it's being diluted by the water that you have in your nib and your feed. So that's what I think your situation is right there. And I'm going to take a sip of water before I cough again. Okay, that's what I think is your situation. So there's two things that you can do to help with that. One of them would be when you go to clean it, you can take a paper towel and you use the paper towel to draw any water that you have in the feed out of the pen before you do it. The other solution is just to keep on writing, and eventually it'll work its way through and get back to its original color. So a couple different options there for you, but at least you know if you do nothing, it'll eventually fix itself. So that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed this Q&A. Question of the week for this week is, who would you pick to play me or Rachel in a Goulet Pens movie? Life of Goulet, or whatever it might be. Who do you think is my doppelganger? So, kind of a selfish question for this week, but I genuinely don't know who would play me. So, I'm very curious to know. I'm about to cough my brains out as soon as I end this video. So, thank you so much for watching this one. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. Check out gouletpens.com for any of the products that I talked about here. You can also check the blog. I have links to all these products. So you can always be sure to check those out. Hope you enjoyed this one. Have a great weekend and a great rest of your week. And right on.